My name is Hilary Louis Doyle. I'm one of the authors of the Panzer tracks on the Panzerjäger systems that the German army used. So here at Arsenal, we can talk about this vehicle in quite some depth because they have a lovely example of the self-propelled gun Pak 40 mounted on a Panzer II chassis, and we will progress with the details of this vehicle. The first introduction of self-propelled or anti-tank guns was based on the chassis of the Panzer II, which was a different chassis to this. But these Panzer II had been found to be ineffective in their requirement because there wasn't the fortification lines that they were supposed to assault. So the first attempt at making a self-propelled gun was taking a Russian 762 anti-tank gun and mounting it on top of the Panzer II, but there was only 150 of those. So alongside this, the people in BMM in Prague were asked to carry out a similar conversion of the 38T, because when the Panzertruppen looked at the different vehicles that were available, they decided that the 38T was too slow and too weakly armoured even to do reconnaissance work. The Panzer II, on the other hand, was still considered to be effective for reconnaissance work. However, after those couple of hundred guns were used up, they then had to look at an alternative gun, which was the German Pak 40. That's a 70.5 centimeter anti-tank gun, which was now entering service. And it was decided to mount a proportion of these on the standard chassis of a Panzer II that was being produced by FAMO in Breslau and FAMO Ursus in Warsaw. So what happened was that the learning from the first two vehicles, the Flampanzer and the 38T, was brought to this. Alket designed a bridge on which the anti-tank gun could be mounted, and this was also considered to be quite a positive step to mount the guns on the vehicle, because prior to that you had to produce a Zugkraftwagen half-track to tow the gun. This would save on the production of half tracks, and the gun carriages, or the capacity for manufacturing gun carriages, could be then used for converting the French 75 into an anti-tank gun for use by the infantry. So that's the background of where this came from. So starting in middle of 1942, the first regular Panzer IIs were converted for this purpose. However, within the space of a month, it was decided that all Panzer IIs would thereafter be used for this purpose. And in July, they started production of these, and that was divided mainly between the main proportion in FAMO in Breslau and a smaller proportion in FAMO Ursus. This particular vehicle, the chassis number, which is stamped here, 28704, shows that it was a FAMO Breslau construction. And then here there is another number stamped, which is the hull manufacturer. That's the armoured body, and it shows that this body was manufactured by Eisen and Hüttenwerk in Bochum. So we can see what the manufacturing history of the main components. The assembly was done by FAMO. The construction was the same as before, a Panzer II Aufbau, but the roof had been removed from a short way back where the turret had been, and then a new compartment was added in which to carry the gun. So we now go and we'll take a look at the interior of this vehicle and talk a little bit more about the details of that. Well, first thing I wanted to talk about was the Panzer II itself, because obviously a lot of changes have occurred in order to make this into a carriage for the Pak 40. With the Panzer II, there was a crew of 3. The turret was here in the centre with an automatic 2-centimetre cannon. The driver was down at the front, and the radio operator was facing the rear with his radio sets here beside the radiator section of the motor compartment. The motor compartment is underneath there. So when they came to convert this, it's quite a clever thing. They made a bridge as part of the front end of the Aufbau, as it was called, the superstructure, over the driver. And I'm standing here in the position of the commander gunner, who would normally obviously be standing on the floor down in the vehicle. The loader radio operator was on the opposite side of the gun, and below here is the engine. The ammunition bays are here at the rear. So when the gun was mounted here, the vehicle was a little bit heavy at the front. The engine ran a little bit hot, which this is one of the issues that they had to address. And when the gun was fired, it's such a powerful gun, it caused a great shock wave, and the radio set, which was over here, was one of the early radio sets, a Fußbreck D, and this radio set encountered quite frequent problems with the valves becoming unseated from their mountings inside the radio set. So the radio operator had to cope with checking that his radio was still operational after a number of rounds had been fired. A lot of the information we have about how these vehicles performed in action comes from a commander in the 4th Panzer Division who were operating these vehicles from the middle of 1942, and they had replaced the earlier 7.62 Russian self-propelled guns that this unit had. And he wrote a very long and detailed report on the experiences in using these vehicles. The first part of the report talks primarily about the tactics that have to be adopted in using such a vehicle, because there are a number of very positive things about it, but there's also a number of very negative things that have to be taken into account. And the first thing that he says is this must never be used in place of a Sturmgeschütz or in place of a tank, because it is none of those things. It is a very light armoured anti-tank gun. And he pointed out also that because of the big sides on it, it presents quite a big target, so it would be preferable to reconnoiter the territory it's going to be used in, and if possible put it into a hull down position. But in no way must it be used as a armoured vehicle for attacking, in his view, or alternatively what will happen is the vehicles will be lost and crews injured. The other criticism he brought in and asked to be improved was the armour of the gun shield. This is a regular anti-tank gun shield, which is simply two 4mm armoured plates spaced apart, and he considered that not to be sufficient to protect the crew. And he pointed out that obviously the crew were valuable people. They were a radio operator come loader, himself the commander, who was also the gunner, and the side armour is only 10mm, and that's meant to just protect the crew from small arms fire and from splinters from shrapnel. So those are the sort of slightly negative things. One other major problem that he foresaw, it was more to do with the organisation of the units, and that was the shortage of ammunition. This gun carries with it on top of the engine deck, very clever arrangement because it's a regular Panzer II engine deck. On this side you have an ammunition bin for 24 rounds. On top of the engine you have a smaller bin with 7 rounds, and off out on the right hand side of the vehicle you have a bin with 6 rounds. And 37 rounds, in his opinion, is just not enough for a gun to carry into action. It given the number of rounds you had to use in order to get a hit on a vehicle. It's not like in modern times where you have advanced range finding and aiming systems. It's a much more primitive arrangement. So what he wanted was more allocation to the unit of armoured ammunition vehicles, Munitionspanzer, probably using Panzer I chassis or whatever. He didn't mind as long as there was armoured ammunition carriers to resupply the guns and to make sure that the action against the enemy was a success. The second difficulty he foresaw with the organizational aspect of the Panzerjägerabteilung was that it was only allocated one single recovery vehicle, and that recovery vehicle was an 8-ton Zugkraftwagen, which was normally an artillery tractor. And he pointed out that most vehicles broke down or were stuck in a situation off-road, and that the 8-ton just simply wasn't strong enough to be able to recover a vehicle from off-street locations. And quite frequently when the 8-ton tried to recover one of these, it too got stuck. So he wanted a change in that each unit be allocated at least one 12-ton Zugkraftwagen, which is a much more powerful engine and would be capable of doing the recovery. So I'll drop down into the well of the vehicle, and now I am at that position where the commander operated as a gunner. The telescope for sighting was here. The controls for the gun were here. On the other side we have the radio rack, and at a later stage some of these vehicles were rebuilt. Quite a lot of them were rebuilt, in fact, and they then got a radio which was similar to the FU5 that was used in a tank. But it depends on the vintage and the rebuilding program. So the loader, when he wanted ammunition, had to go back to take it out of the racks here and to get ammunition over here. So it's not a very comfortable arrangement. You can go from this side over and in, but you have to get them out from there and in. It really was a two-man operation to move them in. But again, this has to be offset against that the crew of one of these anti-tank guns, if it was a towed anti-tank gun, were down. They had the advantage of being down low on the ground, and they had a lot more space to work in, so that they could operate quite effectively. We can also talk about the travel lock here, because the commander of this unit, the 4th Panzer Division, talked about that this travel lock just wasn't sufficient to keep this gun in adjustment. They had to use the outside travel lock, and the problem with that was that a crewman had to dismount to go and take that down, and that wasn't a great idea in an action situation. Another point that he made, which was to be almost a rule, was that this vehicle should never carry grenadiers with it on the vehicle, because it's just too small for the crew to operate, and they can't have people up here and on top of the bins and so forth when they want to get at the ammunition supply. So he said no grenadiers to be carried on the vehicle. So that's a quick outline of the general features internally within a Marder II. To talk about the travel lock situation, here we have the travel lock on the front, and this was absolutely necessary to keep this gun in synchronization. But we can see here this gun has to be lowered to go into the travel lock, and then the problem is you have to get this down here out of the way, and this one down at this side, and this is not something you want to be doing when you're under small arms fire. So they didn't appreciate that. They wanted that redesigned, but there's no evidence that that ever got redesigned. We know that this is a chassis and Aufbau that was manufactured specifically for the purposes of becoming a self-propelled gun, a Marder II. And we know that because the remains of the Aufbau, this superstructure here, has no vision port on this side. If it had originally been a Panzer II, you would see the vision port there. There was about 850 or so of these vehicles produced, plus about, on record, about another 120 were produced from rebuilt Panzer IIs. And then you will see the visor at the side. The other thing that you might see, if it's a rebuilt Ausführung F, the final model of the Panzer II, it will be exactly the same as here. But if it's one of the earlier Panzer IIs, it will actually have had a rounded nose armour, but then all Panzer IIs were upgraded after the campaign in Poland, and you have a rather pointed, extended nose covering the rounded armour. So two things to watch for. And then some of the Panzer II Fs had a dummy vision port here, but only a small number of the Marders actually ever got that. So moving on around then, at this vehicle, we know this was rebuilt. Even after it was issued as a self-propelled gun. And we know that from one thing, and that is that the chassis number here has the letter J, or I for Instandsetzung, where it's showing that it has been rebuilt. And it's possible that this got a new gun because the earlier versions of the Pak-40 had an armoured shield around the front here. The other thing would have been that this was produced in November of 1942, and in the rebuilding subsequently, these vertical volute springs were added. Here this one is rather clear. These were added to increase the strength of the suspension, because it's quite a heavy weight with that gun up on the front of the vehicle. Again, proof that this vehicle was rebuilt is with this patch here. This armour patch has been welded in front of what appears to be a hole, and then there's an exit hole here that has been welded closed and machined off. But it's an interesting thing to see a vehicle that has been through a combat situation, then sent back to the works, rebuilt and reissued again. Now, where this particular one came from, I don't know for certain, but some of the vehicles here at Arsenal came from Denmark, and certainly the 233rd Reserve Panzer Division that were based in Denmark had 8 of these guns in 1943. So it's a possibility that it came from there.